Hello. Thanks for coming. I'm Paul Barclay. Welcome to GOMA Talks, looking at cancel culture. I'd like to begin by saying that we're on the traditional lands of the Turrbal and Yagara peoples, and I acknowledge their elders past and present and recognise them as our first makers and storytellers. I welcome First Nations people here today as I very warmly welcome all of you. Tonight's discussion is being presented by QAGOMA in partnership with ABCRN. It's being recorded for the program Big Ideas and is being held in conjunction with the AIR exhibition on here at the GOMA until Tuesday. Get along in the next few days if you can. As always, GOMA Talks is interactive. You can take part here in the live audience at GOMA by scanning the QR code or following the short URL on the screen. I think it's on the screen up there. If you're watching via the live stream, just pop your comments into the chat window. We'd love to include your views in the discussion. These conversations are enhanced by your questions and comments. This session is being Auslan interpreted by Megan and Duke. Okay. We're talking about cancel culture. There's a lot of talk about it these days. The other day I was reading in The Guardian about whether Picasso and his art should be cancelled due to his misogyny. Earlier this week I saw a letter shared on Facebook that had been sent to the Melbourne International Comedy Festival requesting that a particular comedian not be featured at the festival, or at the very least be directed not to include, quote, defamatory and derogatory material about the Dalai Lama in his set. You might be interested to know that the head of the Cannes Film Festival was this week forced to defend a decision to give the prestigious opening slot of the festival to the new movie featuring Johnny Depp, who claimed that he was a victim of cancel culture. So it's everywhere, cancel culture, everywhere in the public discourse. What is it? Is it real? How does it affect us? What are we to make of it? There is, of course, nothing new about public shamings and the calling out of transgressions, but has social media ramped this up to a new level? There is no real consensus, we'll try and get one, about what cancel culture means, but the Merriam-Webster dictionary describes it as the practice or tendency of engaging in mass cancelling as a way of expressing disapproval and exerting social pressure. Okay, some of you may have been cancelled in the audience, or you may have called on people to be cancelled, and that may be the case with some of our speakers. We'll find out tonight. Let me introduce you to them. On my far right is Brittanie Shipway. Brittanie is a Gumbaynggirr and Turkish storyteller, writer, creative and actor. Next to Brittanie is Courtney Act / Shane Jenick, an artist and advocate. On my left, Michael Zavros, an artist. And on my far left, Zoë Coombs Marr, performer, writer, artist and comedian. Please make them welcome. Okay, anyone on the panel been cancelled?
No, it's not real.
I feel like it's important to define what we all mean by cancel culture.
Yes,
I think
let's
there's
do that.
Probably different meanings to different people, and depends on which side of the political spectrum you lie. You might have a different idea, because I feel like it originated as a way for minorities and oppressed people to call out people who maintained power and had no accountability for what they did. And so but then it kind of took a turn. And like in the US, we have last week Kid Rock shooting up a case of Bud Light because they used a trans woman as a role model. And so there's sort of like those two sides of cancel culture.
Glad I missed
but
that,
that's just comedy.
That is just comedy. I mean, he's called Kid Rock.
Yeah, grow up, mate.
Grow up, Kid Rock.
But Zoe, you reckon it doesn't exist?
Oh, look, I don't know. I think that all those things that you just described, for instance, it's sort of, what we're describing there is actually just culture, right? It's had certain different names in different times. I mean, I've been doing comedy for a really long time, and the entire time has been the conversation Like, under political correctness, is it going to ruin comedy? Is cancel culture going to ruin comedy? Can we say anything anymore? Has everyone lost this? Comedy is fine. Like, it's been fine the whole time. So it's this, I actually think it's just like a conversation where people do things and then some people, or say things, and some people don't like it. Those people have opinions, and then the people who've said the things have opinions about that. Like, that's not new. So it's a real conversation thing that happens, but I don't know if, like, the idea of cancel culture as this sort of boogeyman is not.
Brittanie, yeah.
I was just going to say, if it translates to people losing their job, though, as a result of people calling them out online, I think that can be tricky. And I think that when we're talking about cancel culture, I think a lot of artists are afraid that they're going to be cancelled. And when that permeates throughout your work and your creative practice, that can be a little bit terrifying and daunting to start a conversation or to say what you really think. Maybe you'll be held to moral standards of tomorrow, and it's appropriate today, but tomorrow, what if it's not allowed? I think it can be a bit scary.
Are you one of those artists that has felt under some pressure or have been anxious about some things that you've perhaps wanted to say?
I think as a playwright, absolutely. And there's a lot of it in musical theatre, which is my background as well, and in casting. But I wrote a play last year called Censor, which is about a world where everyone gets so offended that music's been cancelled. It's out of existence. And it's a comedy. Like, it ended up being so funny.
Did it start as a comedy?
But it's so outlandish and ridiculous, but at the same time, we're sort of living in that every once in a while. We self-censor because we're afraid of what everybody will say. And I've watched producers make decisions because they're afraid they'll be cancelled or people will boycott their work or their production. And I think that when we get into that, it's a little bit scary.
But writing a play called Censor, you're making a comment yourself about how you're feeling about the culture around you. So it is a real concern to you that, you know, maybe we call it cancel culture, maybe we call it something else, but some pressure that you're feeling that artists face that perhaps is constraining what they can do, right?
I think so, and I think when we open up social media and we listen to what people have to say and we take it as gospel, a lot of the moral codes and the standards that we're adhering to on social media change really quickly. And I don't know who is the adjudicator of a lot of these conversations and who can play what role and what stories we can and can't tell.
I guess when you're writing a play or thinking about art, you're probably being quite mindful about what is right, what isn't right, and wanting to make the right decisions. I guess the other side is maybe the people who aren't doing that, like who are saying horrible things and doing horrible things, or not even horrible, but maybe not thinking about things as much. And I guess then the consequences of cancel culture, of someone in the public sphere saying something and then the public having the opportunity to say, hey, that's not really okay, and we're going to make you aware of that. There's that one kind, but then there's like obviously the toxic kind where people get doxxed and people lose their jobs or people receive death threats, which I think it's like, I guess it's like that spectrum of what is cancel culture. And I guess if some people are talking about like doxing and death threats and some people are talking about accountability for racism, I think they're two different things, I guess.
Michael has been quiet on my left, but a painting of yours, acquired by HOTA, the home of the arts on the Gold Coast, generated some controversy several years ago, titled Zeus Zavros. It is a hyper-realistic painting of a young boy laying on his stomach in a swimming pool on a swan pool toy with his naked backside exposed, and a young girl swimming in the water next to him. There were calls for that painting to be banned because it showed childhood nudity. Just give us an idea of what you made of that saga, perhaps the moral panic around it and what it says about the freedom of artistic expression for the visual artist.
I think what's strange about that work and that getting into trouble, because I've got into trouble for lots of works and some of them more so than that one, but what was particularly interesting about that is that it was quite old-fashioned kind of censorship. So someone came along to the show where that work was on show. So down at Hotter, where they had acquired this major work of mine. It had already been showed in Hong Kong and somewhere else. Anyway, so they've acquired this work. This guy comes along and he's offended by this thing. He sees a bottom, a naked boy, the sort of thing that you actually can see in any major museum anywhere in the world. And Leo is playing the part, as my son, playing the part of an angel, a putti. So this is this work that has this mythological allegory. But also it's a typical, for me, it's a very typical scene in our home pool. So I'm sort of playing both sides of this thing. I know it's a very provocative thing to be putting out there in the world in some respects, but also it's a very simple domestic scene. So this guy comes along and he decides that this shouldn't be shown in case a pedophile comes along and sees this work. So he's upset that someone else might come along and find this disturbing. He finds it somewhat disturbing, but he's more concerned about what someone else might find disturbing. So this work has been seen by all sorts of people by this stage. And I guess what's interesting is cancel culture normally exists in a social media framework. This is kind of old-fashioned censorship. So then he speaks to the Gold Coast Bulletin, I think it was, and then a bunch of articles happen, and then it gets on Channel 7 News or something, and they contact me, and I don't really want to say anything, so I don't respond to anything. And then this poor journalist is walking around a car park, showing people things, showing people this work on her mobile phone, and no one's really upset by it, and she's trying to get this thing happening, and this is this 5-minute thing on Channel 7, and or maybe it's Channel 9. I can't remember who it was.
Yeah. Sounds like a current affair.
Whatever it is,
is Today Tonight still on?
It had that very gotcha moment sort of thing, and no one sort of rose to it.
So what, she was just going up to people in a car park and going, what do you think of this bottom?
Exactly, what do you think of this?
But it did bring to mind the Bill Henson controversy, didn't it?
It did. And for someone like me who's probably the most provocative things I make are the work that I make with my kids. We live in the shadow of that appalling witch hunt that happened in this country, and it's good and right that we are very protective about those most vulnerable in our lives and that we care about so much. But I think we are hypersensitive about the way children appear in popular culture and in art, and I've kind of been skirting that in some of what I do, but yes, it was a tricky moment.
So do you feel constrained about what you would paint in the future because of the spectre of Henson, because of this?
I don't,
Yep.
but going back to what was said earlier, I think you have this moment where you decide, are you going to be brave, and are you going to push back, and are you going to not be constrained by censorship, basically? And I think we want artists to be spontaneous and to ask the difficult questions that maybe we can't talk about, and we want artists to challenge us and to challenge themselves. And suddenly the word challenged has been replaced by triggered, and suddenly we're in this strange position. But I think I would rather be cancelled than not make something that I think I should be doing this.
Yeah. So Zoe, your character, your comic creation, Dave, who you have performed many times in the past. For those who aren't aware of Dave, Dave is a sexist, hack, male comedian with a neckbeard.
You've seen him.
Pretty good summary, is it?
Yeah.
And he is concerned, it's fair to say, about cancel culture.
Yeah, so I guess I created, and I suppose also, I mean, I joke about, like, it's not real. Obviously, the fears and the... I mean, I just made a documentary about the queer history of Australia. Like, I know what it is to be afraid of being cancelled. Like, it is a real fear sort of thing, and that bravery that's required in order to make things. I think that's a really valid thing, but I suppose we're also talking about, like, ethics, right? So I suppose if you are afraid of getting things wrong and you're actually asking those questions, you're doing the right thing. And fear doesn't necessarily mean that something is coming for you. I mean, I'm scared of ghosts, but they're not real either. But, like, it's kind of so Dave kind of came about as it was really a thing about ethics and about empathy actually. So it was Dave is a character who was based on like every terrible male comedian that I had to get on stage after, who would get up and be like, oh, you know, my bloody wife won't fuck me, and where's the clitoris? I think those two jokes are linked. I'm just doing gear now, but but the thing that I found really interesting was those guys would get up and the audience would like love it as well, was the other thing. Like when we talk about accountability, we're all accountable for those sorts of things. So a comedian getting up on stage and telling like a sexist joke, it only works if it gets laughs. And so the audience is also accountable in that way as well. So I suppose by creating this character where I was doing exactly the same sort of material as these guys and often performing on the same stages, like often I wouldn't do this intentionally, but often if I performed in a lineup show, I would get up and I would do a joke as Dave, and the guy, maybe not straight after, but certainly at some point in the lineup would get up and do the same joke, but for real. And it was really about kind of creating something where it was like, oh, actually making the audience question what their role was in receiving that, because comedy, I think, it's interesting. Comedy is really only just a mirror of society, right? Like it's just sort of. Comedy doesn't like make people sexist or racist or whatever. It reflects those prejudices that exist there.
So is it the same audience that's laughing at your creation of the fictional Dave comedian as is laughing at the actual Dave type comedian?
Well, it's yes and no, I suppose.
Yeah.
It just sort of became a totally different thing. Because it's a parody, people start to notice that you're laughing at tropes and you're laughing at the laziness of it. And then what that does is it kind of creates a different environment for those guys to then perform in, which didn't make me that popular. But but it's also, I think that's what you're sort of playing with. Like that's what comedy's about. And that's why when, you know, we talk about people like the Dave Chappelle's, etc., when people are doing like offensive comedy, I don't have a real problem. I don't care what Dave Chappelle thinks about trans people personally. But what I do care about is when you have like a comedian who's on stage and you have a responsibility when you're speaking publicly, and they're skilled and they know how to make people laugh. But what they're doing is they're collecting a bunch of people together in a room and going, hey, this thing that you might feel a little bit afraid to say, I'm going to say it, and your prejudice is not only am I validating it by saying it, but the person next to you is laughing, you're all laughing together and you're sort of emboldened. And that, I think, is where that... And then, you know, and then someone like Dave Chappelle will or Louis C.K. or whatever will claim they've been cancelled, and then almost immediately later, like straight after win a Grammy. They've both won Grammys since they've been cancelled, and like Louis C.K. is selling out Madison Square Garden. Like that's you know, that sort of idea of cancellation is sort of... It doesn't... I feel like the term cancel culture is like it's this term that is used by the right in order to create an enemy whereby they are the victim of something.
Yep.
When actually what they want to do is just say, I hate trans people. And if they did it like that, then people would go, oh, you're an arsehole. Like they, you know, they would. But it's creating this kind of this false like baddie in cancel culture.
Yeah. I want to come back to comedy because it's a kind of interesting art form that plays at the edge of risk and taboo, and I want to talk a bit more about it. But Shane, I wanted to talk about an incident that you were involved in after you appeared on Play School, Story Time, reading a children's book in drag, and a South Australian Liberal senator claimed that the ABC was grooming children as a result. Not exactly, I suppose, being cancelled, but a pretty serious slur. How did you feel about that, and what did you think the intent of that statement was?
I think what's really important when talking about and thinking about cancel culture is A, the context and also the volume, because so often there can be very strong statements made by one person in this case, and Catherine Deves, backing him up on Twitter. There was literally like two people, like the senator in the estimates who said this, and then one other person on Twitter who like retweeted it and was like, yeah. And I think it's really easy to get sucked into that narrative and react to that narrative. And I think that narrative is so harmful and so unhelpful because not only is it playing into the old trope of equating queer identity to pedophilia, but it's also actually taking away from when acts of grooming are taking place and where children are actually being harmed because it's desensitising people to that language. And so I think what's really important is to be front-footed in those situations rather than reactionary. And I did write an op-ed piece for the Sydney Morning Herald, but I wanted to just sort of say it once, say it clearly, and then move on, because I just think that is it's sort of like Australian politics spoken with an American accent. And we're seeing attempts at that. I still hold faithful that Australia is a little more aware and more mindful than that, generally speaking. And so I think, I think in that instance, that's the thing, is if we're talking about like examples before, I think if you could just somehow like poll Australia and be like, guys, do we all agree with this? Yeah, nah? No, I didn't think so. Okay, good. And then move on. I think we would find that actually most fair-minded people, you know, in this example, understood exactly what was going on. They saw me reading a lovely book on Play School Storytime and thought it was lovely and would be happy for their kids to watch it.
But Brittanie, it's social media and Twitter that distorts this. I mean, it's one thing someone making a comment or attempting to cancel someone or boycott somebody, but it really gets toxic once Twitter takes on, right?
I think so. I mean, how can you hold yourself accountable to the loudest person on Facebook? It's just impossible to keep up with. You can't keep everybody happy. The point of art and theatre and storytelling is to, yes, hold a mirror back at society, but also to ask questions and not answer them. You know, it's for the audience to have discourse in the foyer and not just this on the iPads and the phones. I think that really limits our conversation, especially with the algorithms.
The person who's aggrieved is going to speak so much louder than the 100 people who say, I loved your show.
Yeah.
Loudly, and bring all their friends. And I think that's where this starts to fail. You know, it's
and I don't think people understand how much artists and individuals take that on. Like, we read all of that.
But they haven't come to have a conversation with you either. They've come to make a statement. They're not interested in hearing from you. They've come to make a statement, to make a show of a statement a lot of the time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're right as well, I think, is the thing. Like, when someone disagrees or finds your work offensive or has an issue, sometimes, you know, I've certainly had people call out things that I've done in shows, and in some cases, like, there was one person who was like, oh, that joke had put it on Instagram and was like, this joke is transphobic, and she had a big rant about it, and I contacted her and I was like, you've actually heard the joke wrong. She'd misheard the word that I'd used, and so I was like, you're right, that is transphobic, but it's not what I said. Yeah. Or someone might have misinterpreted something, or it might be about, like, it's about having a larger conversation. So I do think I think we've reached a different part in the sort of cycle of the way that social media does that as well. I think there's certainly been, in the early days of Twitter, there was a real, like, rabid energy for, like, jumping on board and cancelling people. But I don't think it happens in quite the same way anymore as well. And I think those things do go through cycles.
It's so slippery. That's the thing about this term, is it's so slippery and hard to define. And I think you were saying earlier that the right used to claim that the left, the kind of people on the progressive side, were the people that were seeking to cancel and boycott those people whose views that they didn't like or found offensive. But actually, I attended a festival recently and was directly contacted by a member of the conservative media who wanted to know if I'd be withdrawing from that festival because they perceived some of the people who were attending that festival as having offensive views. So it's kind of like everybody's having a go at it now.
Well, it's almost like everyone has an opinion.
But in that instance, and in your example, Michael, that there was someone had an opinion, But then actually it seems like the part that played the biggest piece was the media opportunistically looking to make a story out of nothing. And I think that's quite often where we fall victim, is it's actually, I mean, on Twitter, obviously there's pylons, that happens, but there's, often media, not necessarily journalists, but people in the media creating stories where stories don't exist, because they know that it will get people outraged, and they know that it will get attention, it'll get clicks, and it'll get shared. And so really what we're dealing with here is not, rational, measured conversation, but rather like what will get the most attention.
Oversimplification, actually, is part of it too.
And the loss of context, right? Like, it's very different to see like one of your works in a gallery in a context there, and for a journalist to come up and go, look at this, like that's...
Absolutely. And the same
different.
thing, it's a journalist will tweet a line from an essay that a professor has written, and suddenly they've lost tenure and their whole career is down the drain. And I think context is key, but social media doesn't provide any context at all. It just gives you this bite, and we're quite often prepared to respond to this thing that we've had a brief second with.
And people get confused about, it's perfectly fine for anybody to like or dislike anything that any of us do. I mean,
No, it's not, it's me.
Well, so it's fine if people don't like, what I've done in terms of my media or the performances or paintings or art that people on the panel have created. But, Michael, I was reading the David Marr book about the Bill Henson case back in the time, and he wrote back, and for those who don't remember the Bill Henson case, it was an exhibition that Bill Henson had put on of photographs of teenage children who were nude, and he faced a very real prospect of being criminally prosecuted. Didn't go ahead, the prosecution, but the exhibition itself was quite literally cancelled and was a huge controversy at the time. And David Marr wrote in the book that Australians are not satisfied with just expressing disapproval. We want action. When we disapprove of something, we want governments to leap into action. And he wrote that those who deeply disliked the Henson pictures weren't content to express their disapproval and leave it at that. They wanted something done about it. Do you think that he was onto something there, David Marr, about?
I think so. I think cancel culture happened largely just after that. And governments doing something about it. I mean, Kevin Rudd had a gotcha moment on the Today Show when someone showed him an image of it, despite the fact that a Labor government had sent Bill Henson to the Venice Biennale as our greatest artist at the time with similar work. Kevin Rudd said, that's disgusting, and absolutely contributed to this awful witch hunt that the art world has sort of recoiled from ever since. And I think censorship has ramped up, and self-censorship, but not just censorship from the right anymore. I think what's happening in the art world, and this is something that's a tricky subject, but censorship used to come from a very conservative position. You go too far, you expose too much flesh or whatever it is, and you're told to get back in your box. But censorship now comes from the left just as much, and from inside of our industry, we're taking ourselves apart rather than from someone looking in. And I think that's worrying.
I definitely.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I definitely agree. In theatre and in musical theatre in particular, the types of shows that are put on are definitely censored, and casting is a really big thing. And it's sort of led way to box ticking in casting, and trying to show that the diversity is supported in casting and in storytelling, but it's not, because everybody, we've got to fit into this tiny little box now. We can't exist as human beings. It's really reductive.
Do you think that's better than what it was, though, which was no diversity? Is it like a stepping stone, but we're not quite there yet?
I think it skips a step. I think we're trying to fit people into stories that already exist, as opposed to championing and celebrating culture and new stories with new writers.
It's the inclusion part of diversity inclusion.
Sorry?
Like when people say diversity and inclusion, they're doing diversity, but they're not actually being inclusive.
Yeah, I think so. I think it just starts a little bit earlier on, as opposed to going, here's this white story. We'd love for you to fit into what we've already got, like our set piece.
So as someone with First Nations heritage, are you saying that when sometimes you're approached for a role, that you're approached because a producer is kind of ticking a box?
I've been told that explicitly. I've been told, hey, we've got this show, pick a role and it's yours. And I've said no. Like, it's actually really offensive. I've been working for so long and for so hard. It's humiliating. And I want to get work based off of merit and not because I make them look good.
But it's an opportunity for you, right?
But a poor one. I got into the arts because I want to tell stories that I missed on stage. And I think we're, even throughout all of this cancel culture stuff, we're still missing the point, which is we're not hearing the stuff we want to hear. We're not exploring the stories we want to listen to. It's not true representation.
Anyone else got any thoughts on that?
I do. I think it's an interesting one because I do think, I agree with what you're saying totally, but I also think there's like, in terms of stepping stones and change, I feel, maybe this is a cynical approach, but I think that unless people are held accountable when they don't do that, when they, then representation, then we will continue to get sort of all white kind of like straight type of stories as well. I do feel like it's sort of, it's like sometimes there's an overcorrection, but hopefully it's in aid of creating, but I also like creating space and creating platforms. But I also think, but there's a trickiness in that because then there's this weird, the box ticky thing is, it's gross and it feels sort of strange and weird. It's, it's interesting though, because I think someone mentioned before that it's like the offended person, the negative comment will always sort of feel, well, it certainly feels the loudest. But I think we do need to kind of correct that in a way of like, well, if what we're aiming for is like more stories and diversity and more like diverse representation and genuine kind of engagement and ethics, we need to be also amplifying the things that we like and the people that we support and kind of pushing towards positive change. And I think that's certainly with the way that the left does sometimes have a tendency to turn on ourselves, it is equally important to be as loud as possible when someone's doing something good, I suppose, that we do support.
I wonder, as an advocate, Shane, can these moments of calling out someone for saying something homophobic, transphobic, whatever, be moments where teachable moments, as they say, perhaps opportunities for informing people of some of these issues?
I think it depends on how they're handled, and I think that's one of the issues is that quite now we become like tribal, very right, very wrong. I was on Celebrity Big Brother in the UK.
Congratulations.
Well
Thank
done.
you, thank you. But I was in the House with Anne Widdecombe, who was a Conservative politician who in 23 years of Parliament voted against every single piece of pro-LGBT legislation that had ever come before her. And I remember before I went in, I thought that Gumbaynggirr might be in the House. And so a friend of mine who is a trans woman, we had this lunch and she role-played Gumbaynggirr and I was me. And so we practiced like what some of the things Jermaine and I might talk about and how they might be handled. And actually through that process, what I realised was I wasn't going to change, probably not going to change anyone's opinions, especially not Jermaine's or in this case Anne's. But there was a lot of other people watching who might not understand. So if I got stuck in name calling and like, you're wrong, that wasn't very helpful to anybody watching. And so actually engaging in a conversation, listening. And I remember one of our first interactions, Anne was like, well, marriage equality, as you call it. And I was like, okay. I mean, she grew up Church of England, but she left the Church of England and became Catholic because the Church of England were too progressive for her. So she definitely had very strong opinions about all sorts of things. But in that moment, I listened to her, I had a conversation with her, and afterwards she came up to me and she was like, oh, so thank you for that. Usually somebody would have, called me a homophobe or stormed out of the room or had a strong reaction, and you didn't. And I like that. And I was like, this woman probably doesn't often have much opportunity to participate in a conversation. And I think that there are certain things that as a society we've just agreed upon. Like, we don't need to debate whether trans people have a right to exist. But I think in that situation where she was debating whether I had a right to, get married or whatever exist in different ways. I felt I had the privilege and I had the comfort that I was fine engaging her in that conversation, and I was able to do it sort of calmly and rationally. But I know that these conversations are really sensitive for a lot of people, and debating your right to exist obviously can bring up a lot of trauma and stuff like that. So I think having, I do see a real value in like moderate conversation and engaging people rather than this sort of polarized nature that we're living in. And I kind of think that maybe we're almost like in an adolescence when it comes to social media and the internet, where like we've got this new, like the hormones are racing around our body and we're just sort of, we don't really know what we're doing. And I do think that we're like slowly learning, like maybe we're like, I don't know, 15
I think,
now.
yeah, it feels like it's sort of coming of... That's what I mean about, like, it's the cycle of, like, it's almost like, when you're like a teenager and you think that you know like everything,
Yeah.
and then you're like, oh my God, when I was 15 I thought I knew everything, but now that I'm 17 I actually know everything. And then when you're 18 you're like, well, I was such an idiot when I was... And then eventually you realise, oh, maybe I don't know everything now. I feel like maybe we've had enough like changes and loops and like people coming and going through and redemption stories within the social media arc, that actually it's sort of coming of age where we're starting to realise that there can be a back and forth, there can be kind of some sort of meaningful change and conversation.
I hope that's right. I mean, I wonder whether we've lost the art of disagreeing in a civilised way.
No.
I think we've only lost it if we think we've lost it. Like if
We're doing it
It was
now.
quite civilised.
I do hear a lot of people sort of make that conversation, and I think, well, just agree, just disagree in a civilized way and see what happens. Like I feel like if you're saying, oh, we've lost the ability to disagree anymore, it's sort of like, well, just disagree and have a nice conversation about it, don't you think? Like it's easy to like get again caught in that sort of more extreme of it, but it's like, well, let's just or we can disagree.
Well, maybe it is Twitter that is giving us the impression
I think
that's the case, because there is no place, it seems, for nuance on Twitter. It's just hyper crazy.
Elon Musk is pretty nuanced. That was a joke.
Shane, I noticed that you in the past said that you wanted to be a spokesperson for anti-cancel culture. I'm cancelling cancel culture. If we had iPhones and recording devices when we were young, we would all be cancelled. And I mean, I thought about that, and I thought about some of my own youthful indiscretions and ignorance, frankly, when I was younger, and I would not want that on display today, but because I'm an old fella who existed before the internet, I don't have to revisit it. But plenty of people do.
Yeah.
So in a sense,
I don't remember saying that, just for the record. No, but it's true. Like I think about like my behaviour, well, up until, I don't know, does the internet, does social media, do these things actually make us a little bit more aware of what we're outputting? Like I say, I would definitely be cancelled from some of my younger behaviours if phones existed, but maybe if phones existed, I would have been a little bit more mindful about what I was doing. I'm not sure. Obviously, we can't go back in time and find that out, thankfully. But I think that, what was the question?
Yeah, no, it was just about, no, we were just talking about that, you were anti-cancel culture, because basically the things that we say in the past come back to kind of haunt us, and why should we be held necessarily fully accountable for things that we said?
I don't know if I agree. I disagree with myself there.
Okay, all right. Okay.
I respectfully.
Everyone just wants to know what you were doing.
What?
Everyone just wants to know what you were doing.
Well.
But it's also, but you do raise an interesting point there of like, if you knew that people were recording it, you probably would behave differently, which is true, right? Like when you look at things like a lot of the stuff that, a lot of the conversations that have happened in comedy, especially sort of early on in a way, where it's like there was this weird crossover period where like open mics, comedy was like, for a very long time, it was really just for the people in that room. And it's very much context, and you're making eye contact with people, and it's a particular sort of thing. Once you record that and then stream it out like to the rest of the world, it becomes a different thing. And you don't have as much, the comedian doesn't have as much control over the way what they're saying is being interpreted as well. So things that are not meant for big audiences like that can get out and can get misinterpreted, can be taken out of context. And I don't mean that in a way where it's like someone makes a racist joke in the room and it's like, okay, and then like it becomes bad outside of the room. There is a different level of kind of control and stuff
But
there.
comedy is a dangerous space. And I think some comedians like to play with that sense of danger. Like quite literally. I mean, I remember Adam Hills telling me when he had the midnight slot at the Edinburgh Comedy Festival one year, and he was coming on after an act who was walking off stage with blood pouring out of their head because someone had thrown a glass at them because they weren't funny, and he was just illustrating how heavy things could get at some of these comedy events.
I've done that room, and it's called Late and Live, and it's like a real bear pit, and it is that sort of thing. I actually, I did that room and I was performing as Dave, and part of my act as Dave is that I will trip over. So Dave comes out, does like 5 minutes, or like does a few minutes of like really bad off gear, then trips over and then gets concussed and then does the exact same material again. And I would have like a blood pump rig and I would start bleeding profusely from the head. But because it was in this room that was so volatile, where there was like, everyone's like, this is Scotland and it's 3 a.m. and it's like people are like next level drunk. And people were so drunk they didn't know what was going on. They didn't know I was a woman. They didn't know what was real. They didn't know where they were or who they were. And then someone I could see the security guards walking towards me. I was like, oh, someone's gotten in a punch-up in the front row or something. And then the security guards came onto the stage, grabbed me, went, "Are you all right, mate?" and carried me off stage. Because someone had gone out and gone like, this bloke's not doing well. And and then I can still remember the look in this guy's eyes as he looked at me and realised I had a fake beard on and was a woman. And I was like, it's part of the act, just go with it. It was the best thing ever. But yes, comedy is but I've also had things thrown at me on stage. I've had like really terrible kind of like really scary altercations. You're in like bars, people are drunk. It's a shifty kind of space, but it's also a workplace as well. And when we talk about like cancellation, when we talk about someone like Louis C.K., it's often conflated with like he's doing edgy gear. No, he masturbated in front of his colleagues. Louis C.K. is doing fine. We still know his name. The people who've been cancelled are the women that he masturbated in front of and then had blackballed from the entire industry. We don't know, like, does anyone know their names? What's their comedy like? So there actually are people who get cancelled from the industry, people who get pushed out, people who don't get the opportunity to speak or to have a career. And I was certainly in that space. That's where Dave came from, where I was like, I can't be a woman in this environment anymore. It's impossible. And so I had to create some other way to exist there, and that was by parodying the guys who I was on lineups with. But that
does bring us to this issue of being held accountable for things that you say and do as an individual. And I know, Brittanie, that you're uncomfortable with some of this stuff around cancel culture, but we do need a way, don't we, of condemning certain behaviour, of signalling our disapproval of it. How do we do it in a way, I suppose, especially around performance and art and creativity, that's not stifling?
Get ready, I'm going to solve it. No,
Yeah.
I've got no answers for you. I think that Zoe made a really interesting point about the fact that the women that were the victim of that, they were cancelled. And I think that's really interesting. We're talking about cannibalising our own industries within the industry, like people who work in it. They are the ones that talk the loudest, and they're the people that make sure that a whole production gets shut down, or the women who came out against, sexual harassment, they're the ones that never get to see the light of day, and they never get work from there on in because they're too difficult to work with. What was the question again? The same thing, please.
I suppose I'm interested in the notion of cancel culture as a form of public shaming, as a form of signalling that it's just not on. And I don't want to draw on any specific examples, Shane, but we hear homophobic, transphobic stuff in the media, on Twitter from time to time, and surely there needs to be a mechanism whereby we say that what that person has said, and perhaps they may have a track record of saying this sort of stuff, that is not on, and efforts need and should be made publicly to communicate that.
Yeah, totally. And I think that it feels like a slippery slope, right? Because death threats, not okay. But saying, I disagree with that and here's why, and again, I guess it's that thing of having a civil disagreement with people. I think that is important, and I think that just collectively we all need to work harder at doing that rather than from that sort of instinctive reaction of fight or flight or whatever it is. I think it's about walking toward the middle and sort of lowering the volume of our voices and engaging in actual conversations like, I guess the guy who had the comment about your piece, he's entitled to have his opinion. It probably caused a lot of unnecessary grief for you, and then we talked about the idea of your art in the future, but it's then that there's I guess the quite often the way the populist media works is it would take something like that and see it as like Trump, for example, would take that and turn it into a giant dumpster fire to get more attention. And I think that can be sort of the problem. I think people like criticising, people giving their opinions, that's all valid. But when it comes to people having these pylons and extreme reactions where they're becoming toxic, it's where it's not helpful.
So, Michael, how do we separate art from the artist? The artist we might not like as an individual, but their art...
I think he's lovely.
I mentioned Picasso earlier as one example of someone who many people regarded as an odious individual, but is an influential artist of the 20th century. Countless popular culture kind of individuals that I could name who've fallen out of favour for a variety of reasons, but whose art may well still be considered valuable. Where do we draw the line between the art and the artist?
I think that line is increasingly grey. I mean, we connect the art with the artist all the time, and artists do that. We have good reason to do that. The media likes to do that. We look like our art a bit like people look like their pets. We sort of look a bit like what we make, and I think that connection or that line is becoming increasingly blurred. So when people pile on and hate this thing that you've done or this post or whatever, it often is more about you than it is about the work. And I've often seen instances of that. It's a bit of a, I don't know, it's a bit of a poison chalice. Like we seem to be moving towards that thing. And social media, we can blame it for all sorts of things, but suddenly social media is my gallery, and I leave it open to be cancelled by this cancel panel tonight. Anyone can come and look at anything and say whatever they like, but that is the new gallery for artists. That suddenly the world is your art gallery, and.
But this is a discussion that many people are having, and I hear it said all of the time. I will not read Harry Potter books ever again. I will never watch a Woody Allen film ever again. I will not put Michael Jackson's music on Spotify ever again.
But then we do, don't we? And JK's about to release this new theme, and you were just dancing to Michael Jackson. And,
that's...
and I think we sort of have this grace period, maybe, or this hiatus, from the limelight, and then cancel is maybe not quite cancel, as you were saying before. It's not real, and I don't know, if you weather the storm, maybe you, I don't know.
But I suppose the question is, should we express our disapproval with the behaviour of individual artists by individually banning their art?
I think it's a bit of a straw man argument, isn't it? No one's actually, the reason we ask the question is because we feel a bit like a bit icky about those sorts of things, right? And so it's actually, I think that it's because we're like, oh, but I like Manhattan and Annie Hall is a great movie. Like, you know, like you're like, but Billie Jean, it does have a great beat. The idea of like the art and the artist, like it also depends on the work, right? Like where if you're a comedian, you are much closer to it, whereas it's quite different with in the visual arts. There can be a bit more of a removal. It's sort of like, I don't think I don't think anyone's actually saying we have to say it's bad, the work is bad. It's like, like Woody Allen made some great movies. But when I watch them now, I think about different things to what I was before. Like same with Michael Jackson music. And it's also about like what context are you playing it in? Like what it means different things now. Like if you sit down to watch The Cosby Show now, you're like, oh, it's not as funny. Like it's even though the writing was good at the time, but it's a tricky one. It's also, you know, if you sit in your bedroom and read a Harry Potter book that you already own, that's whatever. No one knows if a tree falls in a wizarding forest. Like it's, but it's different than to be supporting something new coming out, right? If you're buying tickets, is that going directly to that person? Is it furthering their career? Is it making their platform bigger? Those are the sorts of. There are actually ethical concerns that are tricky because ethics is sometimes tricky, and we're constantly grappling with them as humans.
It's curious with the Harry Potter books because there was a campaign to ban them at the time they came out by people on the right in America who saw them as satanic worshipping books. So
now it's like queer trans witches who
are
are
how the wheel has turned. So I mean, can we agree that the threat of boycotts, of calling out, of cancel culture, whatever we want to call it, is having a dampening effect on... I mean, are there things, Michael, is there visual art today that would be harder to create, that would be harder to take the risk of creating than 20, 50 years ago?
Yeah, I think so.
And
I think that...
What like?
It really depends. You know, I'm thinking about a major retrospective of Chuck Close's work that was shut down a couple of years ago because he said something to a model and she came forward and she was offended. And I think it was a disproportionate action, perhaps, that was taken. I'm only reading this stuff in the news, so I wasn't there. I don't actually know what happened, but that's a huge hit to an artist, a disabled elderly artist in a wheelchair when a model was apparently offended by something. That's a massive form of censorship, you know, and a cancelling just before he died. You know, that's a massive hit to a huge figure in American art. I mean, I've got a show coming up here in 2 months. We have lots of conversations about being risk averse. We actually do, and I bring them up and we talk about things, and I think it is having an impact, absolutely. And I think going to what we were just talking about, I think that, you know, taking art down is just it's terrible. It is never a good thing to take down an artwork because someone's offended or outraged by it. I just think it's never good. I think it's a hollow win for someone or a small group that removes a platform to talk about the stuff that was maybe concerning. You know, I don't think taking down art is ever good.
How do you feel, Shane, about that? Occasionally you'll see old comedy or old cinema representations of really, frankly, offensive attitudes toward LGBTIQ people. But I suppose, in a sense, it's giving us the view of attitudes that existed in a certain time. We don't necessarily have to agree with them today. How should we, you know?
Yeah, I guess context is important. I mean, there was a conversation in the US about taking the N-word out of Huckleberry Finn, and there's an argument to be made for giving context to this was a different time, this is how people spoke, and sort of using it as a teachable moment. Like, we're not going to broadcast, hate speech as like from history now on television. But I think that one of the things to consider, I guess, is like we're talking about good-natured people being cancelled. But I think the other side, which is probably more important, is like bad-natured people being cancelled. Like, has the effects of being held accountable in the public sphere made some people think twice about things that they've done, or have there been those sort of positive effects? Because I guess we're sort of like caught between this conversation of like bullying and accountability, maybe. Like we're reacting to the idea of like online bullying and being cancelled in that sort of respect, but maybe there's also a conversation about how people are a little bit more mindful now, how, like we talk about box ticking and stuff like that. I think I was in the US during the George Floyd protests, and coming back to Australia, I was living overseas, moving back to Australia, I think my observation has been since then, we have had such an uptick. And actually, I think I saw something in the news recently about the amount of representation of all sorts of different people of colour, queer people, disabled people, and how that reflects our society. And those things are improving. Some of it can be like box ticky and feel ham-fisted, but then there's other opportunities that are being created. And so I think it's like there's good with the bad, and it's, I guess, that adolescence idea again, where we're not getting it right, but I think at least we're having these conversations, and I think it's unfortunate that there are innocent people along the way who do get cancelled or who do suffer, and I don't think those things are right. But I think that it is important that we're having these conversations and being a bit more, well, the problem is we're not being nuanced, I guess.
Well, I mean, I think there was that concern, wasn't there, with hashtag Me Too, that a whole lot of innocent victims would get caught up in Me Too allegations. But that has not proven to be the case.
No.
And actually, what Me Too has done is been overwhelmingly good in terms of raising the profile of discussing these issues, as has been the case with Black Lives Matter. But I'd just like to finish, we're almost out of time, but I do think it's an interesting issue, Brittanie, that you raised earlier, that, part of what cancel culture has been about has been people who are on the margins, people from diverse backgrounds, people who've been socially excluded, standing up and saying, no, what you're saying is unacceptable, and attempting to make people who've said offensive things accountable. But I think what you're saying is that we need to go a few steps further than that, and that inclusion is not just about tokenism. What are the next? What needs to happen in our performing arts and in our film and television to?
I think that it's great to have discourse. I think that's the point of art. Otherwise, why are we doing it?
Yep.
It's not cheap entertainment, and it's really hard to have a conversation online. And I think that the more conversations we can have in person, the better. I think chats like this are really great. I've already widened my perspective around cancel culture and what that means as well. There's definitely benefits to it. A lot of good has come from it, and it's come from a place of empathy. But we just need to maintain that level of empathy throughout our conversations, I think, and understand that we're all human, and a lot of people are trying to do the right thing, and not to be too reactionary and not jump the gun and look like you're doing the right thing as social media demands, and actually go, okay, am I going to put this person in a job they're not ready for, or am I going to prepare them so that it might take a little bit longer, but we're going to get where we need to get to for the long haul. I think we've got to really mean it.
It's like a whole new skill set in a way, I think, because even just as individuals, but as artists, you have this moment where you're confronted with people's comments that may be negative about what you've done, and there has to be a moment of self-assurance where you're like, oh, okay, hang on, let me listen to what they're saying, let me think about that. Okay, do I agree? Do I disagree? Are the reasons that I disagree because there's something that I'm not aware of? Do I need to expand my horizon a little bit, understand something from another person's perspective? That's the empathy part. Or actually, is this person just unreasonable, and therefore I'm going to continue on my path. And I think there can be a certain amount of fortification for what you're doing as an artist or as an individual, as an activist, as an advocate, whatever it is, because you get to constantly check in with what you're doing, why you're doing it, and question it. And I think it's when it's unvetted and when it's unquestioned that it can become a problem. And I just think, yeah, it's like learning a whole new set of skills of like, we're not used to being confronted consistently on those things. And yes, there are toxic elements, but also maybe there's bits that are useful.
And it's, I know you want to wrap
Got to
up.
wrap
but,
it, but yeah,
but it's,
yeah.
no, I just want to say it is also, it's really good to have these, like often we get stuck in the individual, in the individual responsibility and the individual opinion. And that's one level, but if it means anything at all, it has to be backed up by larger institutional change, like systematic, like larger institutional change. Otherwise, it's just chat.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. Like, out of Me Too comes like workplaces actually have changed. There have been, when we talk about when someone calls out and goes, why is your whole program white people? Then it has to create opportunities for other people to come in and to make a bigger change.
Great. Thanks. We have to wrap it. Been a fantastic conversation. Thanks to all of you for coming along tonight. I want to thank our great panel of guests for their generosity as well. Brittanie, Shane/Courtney, Michael, Zoe,